Hello, it's Ruth here, and I've also got Robbie,
Yeah, hello everybody. Welcome to the show.
and we're moving on to the next part of of Robbie's coaching flywheel, which is creating insight.
Yeah,
So,
and maybe my flywheel, but our series, Ruth, for sure. This is us.
yeah,
This is the fourth now in the series. Almost
yes,
lost count. There's so many of them that people can check out. We'll put links to those in the show notes where people are listening. Um, Getting into the flywheel, um, working our way around it, and exploring it. And I think this one is going to be I'm particularly interested in this one because these conversations, they're deepening certainly our joint understanding together, but I think both of our individual understandings of this and thinking, and we've both had action prompted by these conversations in our businesses. So I'm particularly interested in that for this one. On a really high level, if people don't know about the coaching business flywheel yet, you can find that at the coachesjourney.com. Again, we'll put links. There's a free ebook you can get. There's just an image that you can get to look at it if you want that kind of help to visualize it at thecoachesjourney.com. And there's a digital product you can get, which is a load of templates of my emails. We talked about it last time, invitation templates, but also all the emails I send as part of my business, and a flowchart of how that fits together that you can get there. Call that too. That's called the coaches. What's it called? The Coaching Business Flywheel Booster Pack. Um, yeah, and in these episodes, we're just getting into each stage of the flywheel, one step at a time. And the idea with the flywheel for everybody is that these are things that create a virtuous cycle. And that if you do enough of them now, they store up energy too for more good things to happen in your business later. And if you do enough of them, you almost can't help but have a sustainable coaching business, be working with the clients you want. And we played last time with also the idea that these are also all things individually that most of us would say we want to be able to do more of. And we want to, practice, and that a life well lived has lots of these things in it. And for coaches, I think that's nowhere more true than creating insight for people. Like that feeling when you help someone create insight is just really special. Um, so yeah, we're going to get into that today. Shall I jump in, Ruth, to where I was going to start, or is there anything you want to say to start off?
yeah, I think so. I think let's just jump in.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with a really brief, just like reminder of what we mean by create insight, or reminder for everybody. Like you can think about this. I was thinking about it. I was like, insight, what's it the sight inside of? And I think it's like really the sight into the black box of how the world works, how life works, how the universe works, how I as a human work. And when you see that thing, when you get this like feeling of, or when I get this feeling of my view of the world shifting, of like, oh, wait, this now things make more sense. Like that's an incredible thing. And there have been plenty of times in my life, in coaching sessions and outside, where that has been so valuable. And so I think on some level, that's what we're talking about here. How do we, if basically my hypothesis is if you do enough of that, you almost can't help but end up having conversations about how you work as a coach. Um, and you also almost can't help but, so in the coaching business flywheel, there's two arrows that come out of Create Insight. One goes on to telling people how you work, how much it costs, and how to pay you. And the other one goes up to connecting people with you. So the other good thing about creating insight for people is if someone hears me talk, listens to this episode, if it really creates insight for them, it makes it much more likely that they're going to share it with somebody else. So that's all really important to say. Then I think with this one, does it have to happen? So one of my hypotheses about the coaching business flywheel is these are the five things that if you don't do any of these things, i.e., if you don't ever create insight for people, you can't have a sustainable coaching business. And I think that's true, but similarly, it's true for all the other parts of the flywheel. So does it have to happen? Yes. Like if you never create insight for people, there isn't going to be a sustainable coaching business because no one's going to come back for their second coaching session. No one's going to refer anybody to you. Nobody's going to pay you, essentially. So it's like it's vital. In a way, it's everything about coaching. Um, However people define coaching, Claire Pedrick's definition is one I really like. We've had Claire on the show. She says something like, "Have you helped the thinker move forward?" Like that's the outcome of coaching, and that's great because it really simplifies it, which is like part of her genius. Um, but also the moving forward. What does that mean? Well, it probably means there's an insight there. It may be an insight about what to do. It may be an insight about how to look at things. But if I think about, we talked a little bit, very, very briefly in the last episode about rule number 6, which is from the book The Art of Possibility. And rule number 6 is don't take yourself so goddamn seriously, which is great for getting us out of scarcity and into possibility and action. Like that book was a book which I just read, getting so many insights from it. Right. And here we are talking it later.
I
So,
don't think I've read that. I'll have to
wow,
write that down.
it is for me. It's like it's for me, it's probably the most important mindset book that I've ever read. Even though they don't
Oh,
call it a
wow.
mindset book, right? But it is. It's a book about the power of insight. Really, it's like how if we look at the world one way, it looks impossible and horrible. But if we just look at it a different way, see something new, then actually everything's really different. And but it's a great. They're great storytellers, and they have both. I think they're divorced now, but they were then husband and wife with these two really nice different perspectives. One a conductor, one a family therapist on how we look at these things. So really worth checking out. Um, and so look, insight matters. It's why we're here because we once had an insight and we love the idea of helping other people have insights so that they can have a bigger impact on the world or we do good for them. And the hypothesis here is that's extra because we'll kind of come back to creating insight when we talk about working with clients, i.e., one way that the sustainable business can fall down. We might talk about this more in this episode. Is if our coaching isn't good enough. Actually, like that's one of the things that we have to think about. If we're not selling enough coaching, or if we're not getting enough referrals, or whatever it is, one of the things we might think about is how can I get better at this thing? How can I do deeper and more powerful work? But my hypothesis here is it's better for your business if you do some creating insight before you try to sell to people. That's what happens in the flywheel. That's why it's here. So we're doing create insight at this stage before somebody's a client, before they've paid us. And that's one of the crucial things that it's important to remember, I think, about this part of the flywheel. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, I'm scribbling away.
Nice, nice.
Okay, well, what I've written down is the worry and the need to create insight and what that can do to our coaching. Yeah.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah,
That need to add value, need to be good, need to see that shift in their eyes or.
yeah,
Um, and then obviously that impacts our coaching because we're not fully present and we're maybe not um noticing what we should be noticing because we're worrying about whether they think we're great or not.
yeah, yeah. And look, it's great, isn't it? Because that's such an amazing reflection. Um, and I love it because we get that real sense of these of worries or anxiety, right? There's like truth to that. I just said it, right? Like one of the reasons our business might be struggling is we're not creating enough insight for people when they're speaking to us. I think at the very least, I remember Rich Litvin, when I was working with him, he used to say this. This is a great example of a chosen belief, of a mindset, right? He used to choose to believe if somebody doesn't become a client with me, it's because I haven't served them deeply enough. So there's a couple of things I love about that. So again, that is if somebody chooses not to work with me, it's because I haven't served them deeply enough. So one is it gets it back to him. It's not victim mindset. It's like, okay, this it's on me, right? Like actually, if I was able to serve them more deeply, then they would have become a client in the right way for them. So it really focuses on, okay, how could I have done that? What might I do differently next time? What's the training and the learning that I need to be able to serve people more deeply? And equally, like you say, then you've got to kind of in the moment pretty much forget about that if it's getting in the way of you actually doing the thing, which is such a great reflection. It's probably worth saying. I just caught as you were asking that, and we can get more into it if you want. It's probably worth saying a couple of things for people who haven't listened to the previous episode. So we talked in that about all the different ways that you might offer people experience opportunities to experience you more, and that they are all ways that you could be creating insight for people. So, for example, one of them, which is for some people, is a really new thought is that you can offer people the opportunity to be coached by you. And that's how I do almost all my coaching, enrollment of coaching clients, is if somebody's curious to work with me, after a few little exchanges, we'll do some coaching. And then they'll get a full, undiluted experience of what it's like to work with me. And in that session, I'll just give them everything I've got for that time. Um, and that gets me, when you were talking about that anxiety, I was thinking about another one of mine, which is like, but what if I serve them too well in that conversation and they're finished, they're done, they're fine for now. I got to tell you, Ruth, it's happened a whole bunch of times over the years, and it annoys me in my business with my business hat on. It honestly, it pisses me off. And I
Really?
think like, yeah, like with my business hat on and I need to pay the mortgage head, it's like if I'd just been like 60% as good in that conversation, this person would need a whole bunch more conversations with me to get where they got to. It's annoying that they don't. And then with my kind of like pure higher self on, it's like, this is a great thing for the world. What an awesome thing that this woman is going off to start her business now. And she feels like she can do this whole thing by herself. Like, what would I wish more for her than that? Nothing. Right. And then, with my higher self, I choose to believe that's a good thing for me and my business. Because in the end, she's going to have a conversation with somebody where she sends somebody my way. Now, I see I know there are people that different coaches would have sold coaching to that I have not sold coaching to because of the way I choose to do business. And that's an interesting tension for me in that respect. But I don't know another way to be because in those
Yeah.
conversations, when you're with somebody, Neil said it really well actually on the interview that I did with him. It was this great bit towards the end. Um, we'll we'll link to that to the interview I did with Neil McKinnon, one of the host team. It's a great bit at the end where he just let loose and he was like, when you're in the sacred space of coaching, show up, because he'd seen this thing where people kind of bring a client, get to work with a client, and they're kind of half there. They're not fully in. And in the sales process, that's really easy to do because there's all this stuff going on. So for me, the only way I could be at peace with myself was I have to give everything. I don't know how to do that any other way, really. Um, but the ways we might create insight is not just by that. So we can talk more about that, about creating insight via a kind of prosperous coach style enrollment process and what the ingredients of that are. But there are many ways to create insight for people. All those things that we see other coaches doing in their business, that somebody is trying to sell us. We said this bit last time. Someone's trying to tell us somewhere that blogging is the only way, or LinkedIn is the way you can definitely get all your coaching business you want. Like they all can be ways to create clients, especially if you're creating insight for people. Um, Talks can be, workshops can be, facilitation can be, all these other bits of work, consultancy can be, teaching can be. And as you create insight for people, then they'll connect that. Some of them will at least with you, and that connection is part of this way that we build this trust, so that when you say, "Well, would you like to work with me?" they think, "Do you know what? I felt that feeling of insight. I want more of that, and it's worth this money to me, and I want to pay it." And then we get this. For me, the aim of all of this, right, is not just any coaching clients, but coaching clients where we can do our best work, where we can be delighted to work with them, if a little intimidated and scared sometimes, and they're delighted to work with us, if hopefully a little intimidated and scared sometimes. Where do you think we should go now?
Well, something else that I'd written down is that we can't always see or witness that insight, and we don't always know it's happened.
Yeah,
And that insight might happen for that person 2 months after the call.
it might. And also, the other thing that happens for our coaches in this situation is they doubt that the insight has happened even when it's happened before their eyes. So what came to my mind there is a really useful thing to do for you and your client after every coaching session, but probably particularly if you're doing coaching as part of an enrollment process, is to ask them something at the end along the lines of, what's the most useful thing about this conversation for you? Useful for me because it means I know there's something useful that's happened for them. And in the moments of doubt, I can go, no, look, she is a smart woman. She wouldn't have said that was the most useful thing if it wasn't at least a little bit useful. So I can stop doubting myself that I added any value there. Another one I like is what stands out most from this conversation? And you get this sense of like what is going on, and it's useful for them because it reminds them of what they've taken from the coaching, and that's
Mm.
useful for everybody to be able to actually connect it. Because I think one of the tricky things we have with clients sometimes is the insight is somewhat invisible to them too. It happens, but what they see and know about, and sometimes write in testimonials, is about the really obvious stuff that happens in coaching, which is like uh, the accountability, the actions that come from the session, but often the crucial thing. Like if you took the actions away from a coaching session, um, it, uh, it would still deliver value. If there was no insight, no new understanding from a coaching session, then the actions are things that they would have just written down before the session, and it would be far less powerful. So but the insight is less visible. So we can help, it helps to help clients in coaching see the insight. Because if they don't understand, if we don't understand that it came from a coaching session, we won't go back to coaching to get more of it, even if we want it. Right. So it's really valuable to draw those insights out.
Yeah, and I also think, because I quite often ask, what's the insight?
Yeah, you could just ask, yeah, good. Like also a more direct way of doing everything I just said is ask, what's the most useful insight from this call?
Yeah. And quite often they'll say something that they think I want to hear.
Or say something that you said, right? That's what happens to me sometimes. It's like, and that's not a problem. But what
But
do you do
then I
with that?
just think it's okay to poke
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
prod and say, yeah, but what? Like, I think I've stolen it off you and you stole it off someone else. Like, and it doesn't work with everybody because it feels a bit woo, but what's your deepest wisdom?
Mm,
With the right people can really bring some interesting stuff.
yeah, yeah. What's your deepest wisdom?
And you can do it with eyes closed and hand on your heart or whatever. And I tend to just judge that with the person.
Yeah,
There's some clients I would just not ask that to.
yeah. So one of the things you're talking about is an exercise I sometimes do where, yeah, you get people to really breathe and really slow down and ask them what's the deepest wisdom. I think sometimes the deepest truth you know in this moment. You get really interesting things emerge, and that's often insight, and it's beautiful because it comes straight from them.
Mm,
Yeah. So you know, we get a little bit into this here if we're doing coaching with people. So it's worth saying this is one of the reasons I favor an initial conversation with somebody or in the enrollment process, some actual coaching, because you can go full out on creating insight in that phase versus a chemistry call, which is like usually as the people who do it really well have got some of it, um, but they also do some other stuff. And it kind of gives us permission to basically say to our clients, we're going in search of insight together now. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to help you as much as we can. And for all that mental stuff, I wanted, my enrollment process is basically designed to try and get me out of my head and doing my best work and enjoying it as much as I can at all stages. Because the less you enjoy your building your business, the less you're going to do it, right? So I want it to be as enjoyable and fulfilling as possible. So I want it to be as much coaching and me diving in and me not thinking like I have done and used to do a lot when I was starting out. Am I giving too much here? I don't want to be thinking that. I just want to be like all in for that time. And I think that is really valuable. Now, not everybody does it how I do it. So I basically set up the conversation, and there's a video somewhere that we can link to about how I do a conversation with um, someone a new client. Um, so we have some chat at the start, we have some chat at the end, and in the middle, we're just going to do some coaching. And I just get completely free at that point. So it's like whatever is most useful to that person in that moment, we're going to do it. But other people we've had on the podcast do it differently. Lindsay Lewis, who we talked about last time, has a really clear kind of framework in those conversations, which is how she sets them up, which is something like, you have to listen back to Lindsay saying it, but it's something like, okay, what's life like now? Like, why are you here? Why are we having this conversation? And get a load of detail on that. And I remember her doing the gesture. I'm doing gestures like one side of the screen with one hand. And then you do the other side, which is like, what do you want life to be like? And we get
mm,
that difference. And no Toku, like Toku McCree, who've had on the show a couple of times, he does a series of conversations as part of his enrollment. I think he does a kind of pure chemistry first, then he does pure insight. So I think that's what he even calls it. It's like, I'm just going to coach them until we get an insight. And then they've felt insight. And then the next call, we're going to have a conversation about how we work together. And then I think he even does a fourth conversation after they've said yes or no. So we're all, and this is cool, right? We're always going to have a fourth conversation where whether you've decided to work with me or not, something like that. I'm sure he doesn't always do that, but there's one in there which is like, no, I'm just going to coach you until we get an insight. Um, and uh, and then
That
people look forward
Toku
to it.
McCree episode is a good one to listen to, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the first Toku episode.
Yeah, the first one.
Second one's good as well, but that one's got a lot of the stuff about enrollment in it.
Just a
There you
little
go.
catch is I tend to change what I do depending on who it is and how they've come to me.
Yeah,
If I don't know anything about them, I tend to have a sort of 30-minute fact find.
yeah,
Only because I did used to do Rich Litvin's 90-minute free coaching, but quite often, or in some cases, they didn't really know what coaching was. So it was difficult.
yeah. I'm doing a lot of if I'm doing it with somebody, I'm often doing a lot of work. So there's two things to say. One is I think that what you're doing is really smart. I'm thinking of doing that more in the future. I'll say some more about that in a sec. I usually do give 2 hours because I want like freedom, if need be, to do 30 minutes to do your call in that call. Right? To do up to 30 minutes of scene setting before we do the coaching in that call so that we can really relax into just creating insight. But the cool thing I've been reading, I've got it here so I can hold it out for people watching on video. I've been reading High Output Management, which is a really dull sounding book, but actually a really
Mm,
good book written by a guy called Andrew Grove, who's the former chairman and CEO of Intel. And one of the things he's interested in doing in that book is kind of telling the story of how they really improved their management in Intel. But for the purpose here, one of the things he talks about is as something goes through a process. So he uses a fictional cafe called the Breakfast Factory as a way to kind of demonstrate this, so that the later in the process you find an error, the more value you've added. So let me do it. So as something goes through your process, you are spending resource on it at each stage. And what you want to do is filter out the faults at the earliest stage possible. So you don't want to find out your whole batch of eggs is rotten only when you have already boiled them and are about to serve them. Because by that point, you've wasted your toast and you've wasted your coffee and your customers are getting annoyed. And so if we're coaching people in our process, before we invest 2 hours of our diary in them,
mm.
we want to find out some things about them. I do some email questions usually, and they are aimed at creating insight as well as giving me context, as well as checking that if someone can't be bothered to reply to an email, they probably aren't gonna pay me money to coach them.
I also sometimes use intake forms.
Yeah, I think that's good. I borrowed that. I think I borrowed that. The initial questions that I used to ask people were stolen from Giovanna Caposa's website. I
Oh,
think
really?
she used. I don't know if she still does. We've had her on the show. We'll link to that in the show notes. But she used to on her website have you know, a form saying I want to work with you, and it had a set of questions. And I didn't steal those exactly, but I stole that idea, and I found it really, really nice. And people almost always say these are great questions.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
But
So
again, I think it can just tend to weed out maybe people who it's not coaching that they want or they thought it was and it's not quite. I just think there are a few things that we can do as coaches that lessen that investing in time when one of the eggs is rotten.
yeah. Although when I was starting out, I decided I didn't want to do that because I just wanted to coach as many people as possible. And now things are a bit different. I don't work full time because of the little girls and that kind of thing. Like I don't want to be giving away 2 hours to somebody who is
Mm.
probably not going to pay me. But I also know that I don't have a perfect compass for knowing who is likely to pay me based on initial email. So um, I definitely, when people are starting out, like what you want to do is just coach as many people as possible as fast as possible, as even if it's for free, as long as you can afford to do that, and you can afford the time. Um, But there are lots of ways. Some people do a really low cost first session. I mean, that's how most counselors and psychotherapists work. Or some of them, some of the ones I've seen, it's like a half price initial session. They don't do a free session. Um, but you do half price, and that's another option here. Um, it's probably worth saying a few things about this. So like, remember that this is why you're here for most of us, right? Creating insight. So enjoy that part of this part of the process. Every time you're wondering, so we've just been talking about tactics for filtering people, but I really think each of those can be an opportunity to create insight too, right? Even if it's just like in your, I don't know if you do this, but in your 30-minute getting to know you thing, you tell a couple of stories about what people have got from coaching with you, then that can create an insight for people because it's like, wow, that is what's possible from here. Then there's like an excitement and there's like, I didn't really know what coaching was before, and now I know, and it sounds crazy. Like, how can someone just listening to me and asking me questions do anything? But wow, that story about that woman, that sounds really cool. Same with the questions or the intake form. Like, I would always set them to be of value to the client. Like they can fulfill some other purposes about weeding people out and checking in engagement and creating engagement, but aim for them to create insight too. And usually they will. Like in fact, my filter email has two things. One's stolen from a Steve Chandler list. So it says like, please tell me some more about yourself before the call we have. You might just like, you could do this in two ways. One, send me a long, rambling, unedited email about who you are, what you're up to in your life, and what brings you here. Two, answer these questions. And it's great. Either of those creates insight for people. And we're already kind of moving on that and we're engaging people. And we're doing the thing we talked about last time, which is we're helping them get to the point where there's more trust and more sense of possibility for them about what working with you could be like. And if even your email filter is creates insight for them, then that's a real sense that what is actually some time with Ruth going to be like. There's a couple of other things to say.
Just on that one
Oh
as
yeah,
well. I guess, we can create insight for people without having a one-to-one coaching session.
yeah. I think it's important to get to that, isn't it?
Um, so I ran the online free female leaders course that you mentioned earlier. And as part of that, I shared a video. Um, I need to find out her surname. I can't remember her surname. By a woman called Reshma, and she's doing a speech at a girls' college in America, like their graduation. And she talks to them about imposter syndrome. And just sharing that with people gave them an insight.
There's a lovely bit in the interview you did with Jackie Holder where talk about how we talked about Brene Brown last time on the last episode, and you talk about how it's easy to forget that although many people in the coaching world have heard of Brene Brown, she's a small deal in the wider world. Like,
Mm,
despite being the most watched, two of the most 10 watched TED Talks or whatever, loads of people haven't heard of her, or if they have, they haven't engaged with her work. Like, it will change, like the right person's life will change forever by being introduced to Brene Brown. Similarly, by hearing
absolutely.
this, the frame of imposter syndrome, like we never know what it'll be. And the really lovely conversation that you and Jackie have is like we forget what we know, not everyone
Yeah.
else knows, and that it can be incredibly powerful and special. So there are all these ways that we can create insight for people. That's really important to say. Um, you know, any there's maybe two real highlights that I want to make sure I say. So one is um, we can create insight when we're not there. That's the kind of body of work argument. So people can find my 12-minute method stuff if they want kind of more about what I think about that. But it is a really powerful way to do it, right? You can have work out there that because of the way the internet works is discoverable and is creating insight when people aren't there. This is doing that, right? No one's listening to this now. I mean, it's creating insight for me, for sure, and I think for you.
Yeah,
But there's a
definitely.
load of whenever you're listening to this listener, we're not there. But because we've put this out there, we've done a load of work to offer it to you. That's the previous stage on the flywheel. This might be creating insight for you. And in a minute, at the end of this episode, you're going to get a little advert which tells you how to work with me. And at that point, some of you are going to think, maybe I should do that one day. And that makes it, if enough people listen to this, I almost can't help but work with more clients as part of the Coach's Journey community. So we're kind of in it now. It is worth saying, um, we talked last time about a coaching session being the most pure, full, unadulterated experience of working with you. We know we wouldn't be here, you wouldn't be listening if you didn't know that coaching is incredibly powerful for creating insight for people. And so that is an amazing way to do this. But we can do it in a load of other ways. And it is a powerful thing to have things out there creating insight whenever, uh, like all the time, even when we're not there. But remember, always want to come back to if we want to do this in the most direct way possible, I personally believe doing some coaching with somebody is a really valuable way to do this. Again, because of the sales process, because we talked about my kind of slightly crap metaphor last time of if you want someone to buy a particular brand of car, having them drive any car is helpful. So that's the equivalent of if I want to sell someone coaching, having them read my blog and have insight created is helpful. But actually, if I get the person to drive the exact car that I want them to buy, they're much more likely to buy it. And that's the equivalent of do some coaching with me, and selling coaching then becomes much easier. We want to get really practical with this as well, though, Ruth. So one of the ways to get to do this is to do a lot of offering people the opportunity to experience you more. We talked about invitations last time. But we can get super direct with creating insight. The way you just described, you can just sit down and say, who might I be able to create insight for today? Or who would I like to be able to create insight for today? You probably get somebody come to mind and you can think, what could I send that person that might help create insight for them?
Oh, yeah, I like that.
And maybe it's Brene Brown. Maybe it's that talk. Like, to be honest, can you send us that talk? Can we get a
Yeah,
link to
it's
it?
Reshmish Saujani,
Okay.
Saujani.
We'll
He's a
get that in the
brilliant.
show notes, people, because it's like there's an example of you creating insight for somebody. Because again, even just the words imposter syndrome for some people is just like a huge relief. And the insight there is something like, oh, other people have experienced this crazy thing that I feel all the time, where I just feel like I'm making this up and there's no possible, I'm going to be found out any second. Other people have experienced it enough to name it. What a relief. I'm not going mad. This is a thing that happens to people. Like,
Not
what an
only
amazing
does she
insight.
name it, she dispels it and says it's just been invented by men to make us feel shit. Fucking
Even better,
brilliant.
right? Even better. So, and like we can look then if we're focused on creating insight. Now, it is a tough one because we get into that thing that said at the start of the episode. Like, if we get too tense, it's like think about a tennis player, right? If you get too tense, you don't play your best game. But if there's no pressure, or like a you performance background, right? It's like having the audience there makes the show better, unless it stresses you out so much, which you'll have seen in your, working with young people background, that you freeze. So we need some pressure on this to create insight, but we have to make
Mm.
sure it's not too much, right? I.e., all we can do is try to really the thing on the flywheel probably should say like try to create insight or something like that, because we can't actually control the creation of insight, but all we can do is create the conditions for that to happen. And sometimes we can do that, but we can do that anywhere we go. We can sit down every morning and think, who am I going to try and create insight for today? Who am I going to share something really interesting with? But we can also, well, where am I going today? Well, I'm going to have a chat with somebody while I'm picking my girls up from nursery from another parent. Like, I'm not going to go too far, but what if I'm tuned into, can I create insight for this person today? What if I'm giving a talk? Can I be tuned into, like, this is probably a really good frame for anyone giving a talk or a workshop, like, be really tuned in as the people who are there and think, what's the one insight I'd love these people to take away at the end of this? And then focus on creating that. And one is enough. If people get an insight that stays with them forever, in my work, there are plenty of them. I can name some of the people: Sarah Cartwright, Isabel Mortimer, throwaway remarks in workshops 10 years ago that I still think about because the insight was so powerful for me.
Mm.
So we can get in control of this. We can get in control of it by becoming better coaches, by offering people, by structuring our sales process to include and invite and encourage the creation of insight. And we can get ahead of it by literally focusing on who and how can I create insight today. And again, if people want it, the 12-minute method work, my 12-minute method work is all about that, really. It's about like the non-coaching part of this, like how do we get out of our own way and do the creative work? Because mostly the creative work for people like us will have some insight creation in it for people.
Excellent.
Anything we're missing or we're going to touch on before we finish?
I don't think so.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for diving in. Prepare yourself to find out how to work with me, everybody, now that we've created some powerful insight for
Oh,
you.
yeah, of course.
And yeah, we'll be back in a few weeks with episodes, or it might be next week actually. It depends exactly how things fall. In the next few weeks, we'll be back with conversations about talking to people about how we work, how much it costs, and how to pay us, and then working with clients as part of the coaching business flywheel. Check out the other episodes in the series. Um, yeah, and really hope, like, I feel really switched on for creating insight now. So if
You
people
off to
want to let
create
us know,
insight on the school run.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But also, like, let us know what insights we've created through this episode because
Yeah, that would
it,
be great.
again, one of the reasons I love doing this together, Ruth, is because I get to like have a sense check from you of was this any use for anybody? And because otherwise, we're just speaking in like the upside of this is insight could be getting created anytime. The downside is we don't know when it's happening. Whereas if you're sitting in a room with a
Yeah.
bunch of people giving a talk, you have a sense, are they all bored or is at least someone paying attention? And if there's someone's paying attention, they're probably getting an insight. So yeah, let us know what insights you've taken away. And yeah, we'll have you back on with us on the show sometime soon, hopefully.
Yep. And I look forward to getting stuck into the last two bits of the flywheel.
Yeah, I think the next one especially is one of the ones that people say they have the most resistance about talking
Yeah.
about our work. So that's going to be a fun one. Speak
Cool.
soon.
Thanks, Robbie.